Greetings, gents, and welcome to episode 13 of Econoclasm. Today I will be talking about tariffs, both the recent political maneuvering of President Trump with the tariffs, how people have been reacting, showing that they have no understanding of basically anything surrounding the situation, as well as just a little economic explanation of tariffs and how they work and how they impact economies. So recently, Trump has put out, or claimed he was going to, threatened, however you want to put it, tariffs on a number of countries, such as Colombia, Mexico, and Canada. And there's been a lot of negative reaction from various people, mostly the left, about how stupid it is and how he's really messing with the economy and he's risking screwing everything up. And, Mexico and Canada threatened retaliatory tariffs in response to Trump placing his. And people were saying, Trump, look at Trump, he's making such a terrible decision because look, now we're getting tariffs placed on us. So he's just going to hurt the economy. And so, haha, Republicans, you voted for Trump for a better economy, but now we're in trade wars. But what they all fail to recognize is that it's very clearly a negotiation tactic by Trump. He's not, now, of course, yes, he's espoused a lot about wanting to use tariffs and use it to replace funding with taxes. I'm all for replacing, the income tax with tariffs because it's not a direct tax on people working, and it's a lot easier to get around, and we can bring back the good old-fashioned American business of smuggling, get around tariffs. A number of founding fathers engaged in smuggling. Perhaps most famously is John Hancock, who made a good bit of his wealth off of smuggling operations, avoiding the taxes of the British against the colonies. So if we happen to at any point switch over to tariffs as the main source of government funding, just want the conservatives, who are likely going to be very hostile towards smugglers, to know that smuggling is an integral part of the American tradition. In the founding of this country, smugglers are time-honored heroes of the United States. So when you go whining that, smugglers are bad people, you're just directly going against what you as a patriotic American, because all conservatives like to stylize themselves as patriotic, that you're going against what this country was founded on and who was founded by. Smuggling is a very noble and respectable profession, and they should be seen as heroes. If we reduce what's over to tariffs, there's a lot of history supporting tariffs being, or smugglers being, good guys. But I digress. We'll get to that a bit more later. But yeah, despite Trump arguing that or campaigning a lot on the use of tariffs, these weren't funding or trade tariffs. These were negotiation tactics. He wanted certain things out of these countries, and so he threatened to slap a tariff on them to try and get what he wanted. So no, it wasn't just him making an economic or financial decision. It was a tool. He is well known for being a negotiator. In a negotiation, you tend to either demand more than you really want, as we saw with President Polk's famous 54-40 or fight when he was negotiating the Oregon Country territory dispute with the British. He really wanted the 49th parallel to be the line, but if you say exactly what you want, then you're in a worse position in negotiating. So he said 54-40 parallel instead. And then when he was able to negotiate down to the 49th with the British looked like they had gotten more than they could have, but really Polk got exactly what he wanted without having to do much. So you either overstate what you want, or you threaten something that you can remove away. And that's what Trump did with the tariffs. He wanted something, and so he put something out there that could hurt these countries that they didn't want, that no one wants tariffs slapped on them. And it worked. Everyone was pointing out to the retaliatory tariffs that were coming in. Oh, look, Trump's hurting us. Well, guess what? He got the concessions he wanted. When he threatened Colombia with tariffs, what do? They decided to finally accept the deportation flights. When he slapped them on, or threatened them to Mexico and Canada, they agreed to do better with border security to stop illegal immigrants and fentanyl from coming to the United States. So it worked. I saw a lot of people, whenever Trump agreed to freeze the tariffs or put off starting them, they were laughing. Ha, he gave in already. Trump was acting all big and tough and he backed down so quick. Because he got what he wanted. He had a stated goal and he achieved it. So he didn't need to have the tariffs anymore. It's not him backing down. It's the negotiation playing out exactly as he wanted. You're the idiots, not him. If you're really thinking that he got owned because he had to give up on the tariffs. No. It played out exactly like he wanted. So, who cares? He didn't back down in defeat. He made the deal he wanted. It's just hilarious to watch people have zero sense of the situation, trying to mock him when they just don't know what was going on. They're really showing a lack of intelligence, a lack of situational awareness, and a lack of knowledge of the situation itself. These are the people who have no critical thinking skills, who can't analyze what's going on, who can't pay attention for themselves. They just receive talking points from the media or from Twitter or wherever they go, because they don't think on their own. They can only take in what talking points are from, Operation Mockingbird and spit them back out, because they don't have any individual thoughts. They have no internal dialogue, no inner monologue. These are sub-100 IQ individuals who are only good at parroting what they're told to say. And it's a very, very common thing I found on the left, where they don't have ideas, they just repeat what media narratives are. I see that constantly. when dealing with the left. You can know exactly what's going to be said by just paying attention to what all the media talking points are. And when you argue with leftists about really anything, you're going to get the exact talking points back. I've had that exact thing happen where I've been arguing with someone on the left, and they literally just restate the exact argument from CNN, MSNBC, whatever it may be. Literally word for word. It's like, oh, you don't have your own arguments. And you say, oh, well, because they got it from there, but that's because it's a good point. It's not a good point. It's always a bad argument. And it's not something I see on the right, even with people on the right that I disagree with. They're not just parroting talking points. They have their own arguments. They think through things logically. They may come to their own solution, but they at least have some intelligence and not just puppets of the establishment, of the deep state, of the media. And this lack of intelligence can also be seen when you saw how people were reacting to the tariffs being placed when Trump announced the tariffs on other countries. People were talking about how, oh, you're hurting the American economy, tariffs are bad for us. And so you're really just, punishing the American people with tariffs. And again, I'll get into the economics later. There's another thing I want to touch on before I get there after this point, but so people were mocking Trump, and Republicans saying, oh, Trump's hurting the economy by placing tariffs because tariffs hurt us. And then when Mexico and Canada threatened their own tariffs on the U.S., those exact same people were saying, oh, look, Trump's now is really hurting the American economy because these other countries are placing tariffs on the United States, and that's going to hurt the United States. Well, which is it? Do tariffs hurt the country that put them out, or do they hurt the country that they put them on? Because when it's Trump putting tariffs, it's how he's hurting the U.S. But when other countries are putting tariffs, it's how they're hurting the U.S. Do tariffs only magically hurt the country that is run by a president you don't like? I mean, again, I'll get to the economics later, but tariffs do make both countries worse off. Yes. But they weren't making that point. They were only saying how on both cases it was seemingly only somehow going to hurt the U.S. They didn't look at Trudeau and be like, hey, what are you doing? You're hurting Canada by putting tariffs on the United States. Because obviously Trump's hurting the United States by putting tariffs on you, but now you're hurting Canadians in response. No, somehow both were just hurting Americans, and both were evidence of Trump, being stupid or threatening to ruin the economy. There's a severe cognitive dissonance there. There's no logic to their arguments. It's literally just, oh, how can we make Trump look bad with everything that happens? I've said it before on this podcast. I don't like Trump. I didn't like him in his first term. Second term, so far, is doing a hell of a lot better. Shout out to him for freeing Russ Albrecht. Big W. That alone justified my vote. So, thank you, Trump, there. Stuck true to his word there, even though it technically wasn't day one. It was like later evening of day two, which I'm not gonna harp on. It's not the issue, not the hill to die on if he does it a day later. But so I'm not a fan of Trump, but these people were clearly it's Trump derangement syndrome, which I guess does happen a bit on the right, where they basically view him as like political Jesus Christ, where he's like a savior, but it is definitely far worse on the left, where they throw out all logic and everything is just how it can be used to make Trump look bad. Just everything has to be used to shit on Trump, no matter what the logic is there. With the tariffs, they clearly had conflicting logic on both sides of when the tariffs were laid, but all it was just, well, how does this make Trump look bad? And then whenever he got the exact results he wanted, people didn't have the intelligence to realize that, and no one in the media told them that, so of course they didn't know it, because again, they have no critical thinking skills. And on that regard, I've seen a lot of people say with tariffs about how, the left will look at people on the right and say, with tariffs, those costs just get passed on to the consumer, right? So it's really going to make you pay more. Yes, that's true. Why is that only with tariffs, though? Why not any of the other taxes that you guys have been pushing for years on corporations or businesses or what have you? You know what happens when you raise the corporate tax rate? They push that cost onto the consumer. Never heard you ever say that in the whole time when you've been pushing for higher taxes. If you raise taxes on business 15%, or if you lay a tariff of 15%, the cost gets passed on to the consumer, but never once have you ever heard anyone making this point about tariffs say it about any other taxes or any other regulations they want to put onto people. And yes, regulations do have cost. It costs money to comply with regulations. And so that money has to get passed on to the consumer too. Regulations have costs that are pushed onto the price of the final product, which hurt consumers. But in all the talk about regulations and increasing regulations, we need more regulations, never once heard any of these people on the left mention how it's going to increase costs to the consumer. Or what about the constant calls for insane minimum wage raises? By the way, minimum wage should be 0. That's the right minimum wage. Fuck FDR. He deserved polio. Fully. Don't forget, he had advanced knowledge about the attack on Pearl Harbor. That's why the carrier groups weren't in the harbor at the time. He could have mounted a resistance, but instead, no, he let 2,000 Americans die to justify his want to go to war. So, yeah, he deserved not to have his legs. What's the point I was making? Yes, the minimum wage. Minimum wage should be 0, but when these people want to raise minimum wage to $15, $20 an hour, guess what? That's a cost to the business that gets passed on to the consumer, which is perfectly acceptable. Or, no, you hear all the time that that's not going to happen, that higher minimum wages don't increase the cost of the consumer, but tariffs do. Is it a willful ignorance or outright lying? It has to be one of the two. Or I suppose it could just be legitimate stupidity. I don't know. Leftists, let me know which of the three it is. But now to the economic point I've been alluding to throughout so far, is that yes, tariffs are bad for an economy on both sides, because it is an additional tax, and taxes do get passed on to the consumer. So if you place tariffs on steel, like Trump did in his first term, that distributes the cost along the production line of imported steel. And anyone who uses steel, the price is going to go up. People say, well, why not? They'll just switch to American steel instead. yeah, why weren't they using American steel in the first place? Because it was more expensive. So they're spending more either way, whether they use the now tariffed imported steel or the previously more expensive American steel. Prices are going to go up because the factors that factor into the production go up. And so it will impact the economy. Is that a spider? I hope not. And so, yes, tariffs do hurt the economy. And yes, the country that's the tariffs are put on, it does hurt them too, because now their products won't get purchased to the same degree because it will be more expensive for either producers to use imported materials or be more expensive for consumers to purchase finished products. So it does legitimately hurt both sides. And even when you say, oh, well, yes, it's a temporary pain, but it's a long-term benefit because it allows, domestic industries to build up and be able to compete. But why do you think we don't have those domestic industries? Because they've already been proven to be economically unviable in a competitive market. Do you think the U.S. has never had a manufacturing base, and now we're going to get one? Finally, at last, after 250 years, we're finally going to get manufacturing because of tariffs. No, we've had manufacturing in the past, but our economy developed beyond the point where it was economically viable. It was no longer necessary in a highly developed economy like the United States, and we were able to outsource it to countries with cheaper labor and engage in manufacturing that way. So that way we could focus on higher economic projects. You don't need manufacturing if you move on from manufacturing, you can get involved in more tech or healthcare or education or art. That is a more final or a more desired good of a highly developed economy. It's not a bad thing if your economy moves on from industries that are no longer viable. There's comparative advantage between economies that allow different countries to benefit or to produce at various economic stages and various degrees of efficiency relative to their cost and benefits to the overall global production. The American right likes to romanticize factory work when there's a reason people stopped working there. There are better jobs available that paid more money, and manufacturing wasn't economically viable in the country because it became too expensive to produce stuff in the United States when you had a much cheaper source of labor elsewhere. And if you want to say that's a bad thing, then you get to pay more for your products, but don't force everyone to be worse off. Everyone's talking about, how expensive things were under Biden, and yes, they were. He was terrible with that. But you want to force the entire economy to become, more expensive. People would have to spend more for the same number of goods. You're going to lower the standard of living that way. That's not what you should be chasing after just because you romanticize factory work. And the idea of a temporary hardship for a long-term payout, it's not like you're going to be able to produce at these cheaper levels just because you suppress foreign competition. You may develop manufacturing base because it's now cheaper with the added artificial cost of tariffs, but that doesn't mean it's not a bad idea. It doesn't mean it's not going to hurt the economy. You're just making it economically viable to produce here, but that's only because you've raised cost for foreign goods. You haven't made it cheaper to make it here. You just made it comparatively not as expensive. If it costs $20 to make something in the United States and $15 to make it somewhere else, and you slap a $7 tariff on it, well, suddenly it's not cheaper because it's $22 coming in and now $20 to make it here. You have to pay actually $5 more for it. It's more expensive. And no, you're not going to get, more better paying jobs for it. You're just going to get people going into an industry that was already put out because it wasn't paying as well as other industries. You're just shifting where people work, not based off of what the market has decided is efficient or economically viable in a global market. And people get real touchy over the subject of a global market or, economic efficiency. Look, if you want an economy to perform as well as possible, which I would imagine most people do, especially with how poorly the economy's been performing in recent years and decades. You want to be able to afford a home, you want to be able to afford goods, you want to be able to save and give your kids a better life. You can't romanticize industries that have fallen out for good reason. I know people tend to not like economics because they think it's some heartless, evil thing that just promotes what benefits businesses, but it takes into account everyone in the economy and it understands how an economy works. There are immutable laws of economics that you can't really change. And after rent control being bad, the idea that free trade benefits both countries is the thing economists agree on to the second highest degree across the profession. Whether that be Austrians, Keynesians, neoclassicals, what have you. And I know, obviously, I've mentioned before that climate change science has that, ideological capture idea that the ideas in the intellectual world are just to benefit government, and they are, but so people might push that back on the whole economist agreeing thing, but you can't accuse Austrians of supporting the government or businesses, corporations, because Austrians are one of the biggest advocates of the free market. And they're the ones who propose the idea that an economy grows by saving and investing, not through purchases. So they're not trying to just drive business to corporations and increase the profits of these billionaires. No, they actually understand what drives an economy, and they're not trying to push people into just benefiting the super rich. Free trade benefits everyone because it expands the market globally. Competition is better for an economy, and the more competition you have, the better off you are. So there's no sense to limit it to just your country, because you're denying hundreds of other markets that can compete and improve the lives and economic well-being of the people in your country. And take it logically further, if you want just the United States to produce what the people in the United States consume, why not go further? If it's so good that the economy is better with the United States being just the only thing that produces for the United States, why not have individual states produce everything for themselves? Put tariffs in between interstate trade. You know, if you're from Minnesota and you want to sell something to someone in Wisconsin, well, why not put a tariff on that? So that encourages Wisconsin to build up whatever that industry is. Or why not take it further and have it down to the county level or the neighborhood level? Or if you're so concerned about, being self-reliant and autarchical economically, why don't we just require everyone to produce their own goods themselves? If that's, the end, logically, it's the logical end of, tariffs and restricted trade. If your hatred of free trade is that strong, why trade with anyone? Why trade with your local grocer? Because, is he making you worse off when you buy bread from him? Because you're not making the bread yourself? No, of course not, because you not taking the time to grow grain and make the bread yourself can be spent on other things, where you can, have a wider basket of goods, or, afford medical care or education, or have money to save because you have goods that are cheaper elsewhere. That's the end goal, is to allow prices to go down so that way people can have more money available for more goods. And it doesn't just mean purchasing, consuming. You do a whole episode on that, but it's not just that. Like, there are other goods aren't just defined in terms of products you can go buy at the store. You can, buy stocks or bonds, or, engage in savings for your kid's future. Contribute to a 401k, an IRA. But if you're restricting trade, you're going to have more expensive goods, and so if you want to maintain the same standard of living, you're going to have to spend more money, and so you have less available for saving or for other things you might need. It's just economically smart to have as much free trade as possible. And I get that sometimes there can be other things of higher good than, economic performance. And yes, like, you don't want a complete free market in, like, allowing people to come in and provide labor locally, because then it suppresses the wages of locals. But you can still have a free market in goods and trade that will allow, comparative advantage to take hold, where people can focus on what they do best. That's why the United States doesn't manufacture anymore, because it doesn't do manufacturing comparatively best compared to other countries who can do it cheaper and similar quality. That's why the United States economy is moving towards technology and healthcare. Free trade is good. Let it happen. But it's people on the left need to really understand exactly what's going on when Trump's putting these tariffs as a negotiation tactic. And they need to have some logical consistency with supporting tariffs or taxes or regulations, and understand that it all passes on to the consumer. Support the free market. No taxes, no regulations, no trade restrictions. It's the smart thing to do, and it's also moral. The government has no right to use force to prevent a mutually beneficial trade. But that's a story for another time. But that'll be it for today. Thanks for listening.